Known as the professor of politics across the country, his ascension to power was as dramatic as it was unpredictable. He lived up to the quote that says, "Start unknown, finish unforgettable." And this man today, essentially his story is being at the right place at the right time, or rather being timid or having a cornmeal for a brain, as he was commonly referred to by some people in power. But he later on became one of the most powerful people, feared people in the country, and his legacy still lives on. Good or bad, he still has one at least. Hi, welcome back to the African Footprints podcast with me, Effie. And our story today, we are talking about our second president, a man who essentially I would say was very lucky, so to speak, because of his nature at the beginning of his tenure. But it got him where he was, and he served for 24 years. And that is the legend Moi.
Daniel Toroitich Arap Moi. I talk about politics, people think I'm racialist. I'm not racialist.
Wengine wanataka kuangusha serikali yako wakiwa watumishi wa serikali.
That I do not intend to make major changes in the administration of the country.
Kama yuko mtu ametukana mimi namsamehe, na kama yuko mtu ambaye nimesema chochote ambaye kimeumiza roho yake unisamehe. Watu walikuwa wanasema Moi alikuwa dictator, lakini hawakufahamu kwamba discipline si dictatorship.
Like I said, his ascension to power was unpredictable and very dramatic. This is because it was essentially the case of being at the right place, at the right time, in the right circumstances. Now, for those who might not know, Moi essentially ascended into power not because he won an election or because he was the best at it or because he wanted to be president, but simply because his predecessor had died. And that is the late President Jomo Kenyatta. Now, around 1978, Jomo Kenyatta had experienced ailing health, and for a while he was in and out of hospital, being unwell. For most of the time, his health was failing. And at the time of his death, Moi, being the vice president and who had also been in leadership for about 23 years up to that point, was poised to become the president. But I want us to look at this thing deeply. How Moi became the Moi that we know, or how he ascended into president, and why I say that his ascension to power was very dramatic and very unpredictable. Now, as the story goes, in 1955, that is the first time we're introduced to Moi as a politician or Moi in the leadership sphere. This is because up to that point, Moi was a teacher, just from a humble background, the boy from Baringo, yeah, and he was just teaching in some school in Kabarnet. Just a humble young man, you know, doing his business. But in 1955, he resigned his teaching job and became an elected member in the Legislative Council, that's the LegCo. So when he became an elected member representing Kenya in the LegCo, of course this introduced him to people in power, introduced him to politicians, and of course he had his first visit to the Lancaster House Conference. And this is where Moi's story essentially begins. And this is where we meet a Moi that was not just a teacher, a Moi that was not just a young boy from Rift Valley, but Moi, the man who became the politician and now termed the professor of politics. And we will soon understand why we say he's the professor of politics. Now, for Moi, there's so much stories, and some true, some just myths that we've created in our heads, some glorifying him and others vilifying him. But either way, he got praises and curses in equal measure. So I want us to just His story might be a bit long, so we're going to split this into, it's going to split into the next season. But for now, I want us to focus on how Moi began as, you know, the man no one knew about, to the man that we now know and is very unforgettable. So Moi at around this time in 1966 had served as the Minister for Home Affairs and as the Minister for Education, but he was still not known. He was not in the limelight, just one of those ministers that was appointed to cabinet. And around this time, the Gema community being in power, the Kikuyu barons were the ones who controlled everything in cabinet, everything in parliament. So Kenyatta's cronies were the ones in power together with him, and everything was essentially the Kikuyu community, most of the people in leadership, most of the people surrounding the president, and essentially the shadowy figures that were making all the decisions together with the president. But there was Moi just lurking in the shadows, waiting for a time to strike. And he was in the shadows for a bit too long, until the time when, I'm not quite sure of the year, but I think 1966, when the then Vice President Murumbi abruptly resigned. This left a vacuum in the office of the Vice President, and therefore Kenyatta needed a Vice President, and therefore called his Gema community, his council members, to advise him on who they think should succeed him. Now, those days we didn't have the democratic structure we have right now, where, of course, the president and the deputy president go in one ticket. Those days the president could remain and the deputy would resign, the president would resign. Okay, never happened, but there was that possibility. So when Kenyatta needed a vice president, he looked. He searched around, and certain names were thrown around, like Mbiu Koinange, the names of Ngegi Muigai, Charles Njonjo, and people like that, most of them being the barons that were the Kikuyu barons that were in power together with him. But as he looked, he felt most of these people, one, had very serious political ambitions, and they could unseat him, or rather they could challenge his presidency. And two, these people had money. They were loaded. Most of them were funding a lot of things in the country at that time. Most of them owned very big businesses in the country because of, you know, their closeness to power. So because of this insecurity and believing that these people might one day be gunning for him, the names that were mentioned, and Njonjo came to the name of Moi. And when Moi's name was mentioned, story goes, I was not there, but as the story goes, he stretched his hand and told Njonjo, stop. That is the man I'm going to appoint. And a phrase that, you know, most people associate with essentially the foundation of Moi's presidency. That is the man I am going to appoint. So as Kenyatta uttered those words, of course, the members of the Gema community, the oligarchs therein, were not so happy about it. They were not thrilled because, hey, we are the ones who've been supporting it. Should definitely be one of us. But Kenyatta knew what he was doing, and I tend to say Kenyatta was a very smart man. He was a very smart politician. He just knew not to play against the colonialists because, well, he played with the colonialists, and look where it got him and his family. Anyway, that's beside the point. So at this point, Kenyatta felt Moi did not have much political ambitions to challenge him, and therefore he was the best candidate to become the vice president. But the talks that were going around his cabinet and around the compound was that Moi was often described as the man with the posho brain. Now, for the Kenyans here, which I know most of my viewers are, posho is essentially millers, right? So the kisiagi. And they described him as this because they felt he had maize mill, a maize mill kind of brain. So he was thick in the head, or rather he was not ambitious enough. I mean, at the end of the day, they felt, he was not a politician. He was just a teacher we took and cleaned up. So at least that's what they thought. But I think this is what makes me respect Moi in a bit. This man was a master player. He was tactical, he was cunning, and he was a brilliant politician. Because when all this happened, he never challenged them. He never positioned himself to look like he was gunning for the presidency after Kenyatta. He just let them believe what they wanted. And around the last 5 years of Kenyatta's presidency, his health was failing, and of course, the Gema community and those people in leadership started looking for who could be the potential replacement. And as usual, the names of Ngegi Mungai, just the names that were flaunted for vice president, were the same names that they were considering for president if the president dies. Now, on that fateful night in 1978, that call was made by Eliud Mahihu. And first, he called the leaders who, after Kenyatta had died, he made that call to the leaders, the various leaders who are within Kenyatta's cabinet and those who are Kenyatta's friends and his close allies. And you know, the most famous saying on his death, the eyes of Kenyatta have closed. That was essentially giving them an alert that the president had died and we need to now get things together. So the rumor has it, I was reading about this and I found it very fascinating, but there was a period of around 1 or 2 days, close to 24 hours plus, that they did not inform members of the public that the president had died. And this is because of two things. One, Moi was the vice president, and remember, they did not feel he was fit enough or did not like him to be in that position. So Moi was the vice president and they did not want him to ascend to power. Now, the 1963 constitution essentially had it that if the president dies, the vice president succeeds the president at least for the remainder of the term. And this constitution was not amended. So there was talks about amending the constitution just so that we can have Moi not serve as the president for long. And instead, we can have him serve for a short period and then appoint one of our own members from the Gema community to continue as president after Kenyatta. But this was not the case, as we all know. The man went on to serve for 24 years. So they were having conversations on the sidelines about trying to overthrow Moi. And one of the interesting conversations that happened was offing the guy. You know, just having him killed, having him assassinated, just so that he doesn't ascend to power. But the people that were tasked to do that essentially miscalculated the flight that was supposed to land. Moi was supposed to land and see Kenyatta's body and all those rights and things for him to take over power and for Kenyatta to be buried. So they enlisted a tactical unit. I am not sure of the name, but we'll make sure we highlight it down there. I think it was the Ngoros or something of the sort. So a tactical unit was enlisted to assist in fulfilling this task, but they failed miserably because, well, we all know Moi died very recently. They failed in the task because they miscalculated the arrival time of the president to be. And when that happened, they were not able to attack, and well, the riots went on as was supposed to happen. Now, one thing about President Moi is this. He knew what was said behind closed doors. He knew how these people thought of him and how these people talked. And he had all the information. But he decided to play dumb and essentially just play into their plot. So they think he's stupid. He played stupid. They thought he was a posho brain. He played a posho brain. And he essentially never at one point showed that he challenged President Kenyatta or showed that he had any political ambitions whatsoever. And therefore, this worked to his advantage because they underestimated him. And this is the one card that Moi played correctly. I mean, the man was very questionable. We will talk about that later, had very questionable tactics. But we can never say that Moi was not smart. He was very smart, he was very tactical, and he knew how to play his cards right. So Moi continued to play dumb and just went on like he was this naive boy, naive teacher who everyone thought he was, until he got the power. And once he was the president, well, it was his time to shine. And first things first, he essentially did away with the political barons that Kenyatta had in his cabinet, essentially the people who were the decision makers. He just dealt away with them. Next was having his own people in cabinet. So we moved from a country where the Gema community was leading to a country where now the Kalenjin community is leading. And this is because Moi felt that to achieve his agenda and essentially to become the president that he wanted to be, the leader that he had envisioned, he needed people who supported him. He didn't need people who doubted his leadership or people who doubted his presidency. And because he needed people who supported him, or let me say his own people in his cabinet, he brought his own people like Biwot and, you know, the people who are, even some from the Gema community, but people who supported his presidency, people who supported him when he became the vice president, and not people who cast doubts on him. Now, once he ascended into power, of course, his first agenda, like I've said, was to reshuffle the cabinet, reshuffle his inner circle, and essentially make it people who supported him. And he had that. That was going. Next, what were his policies? What were his plans? Moi needed money. And because he needed to make money, he had seen how his community was treated or how Kenyatta was making money, the corrupt dealings with some unscrupulous business people. And he picked a little bit from Kenyatta's playbook and did the same things. He appointed the same people who would help him make money, who would help his agenda. And I think Moi's presidency, that 24-year reign, was marked with a lot of him asserting his dominance. It was marked with a lot of political assassinations and people being targeted because of their political parties or their political affiliations. And by that, I mean people who did not support his ambitions were essentially offed. And yeah, we all know a number of people who were assassinated during his tenure. So that was one thing. And I feel like this was a way of him asserting his dominance and just telling them, you guys underestimated me, but here I am. So his reign, the 24-year reign, as most people would term it, was the 24-year reign of terror. And this is because other than the political assassinations, we witnessed so much corruption scandals. And I think we talked about one of them, the Golden Bag scandal, in a previous episode, the first episode. So please, we'll put a link down below. You can go watch that. So there was a lot of corruption scandals. And this is because he needed to amass enough wealth to the point that when he was retiring or when he was leaving the presidency, he was as wealthy as the Kenyattas were, as wealthy as the barons from the Gema community were. So essentially it was him trying to prove himself. And for him, it was towing the line of proving himself as a leader. I deserve this position and I'm not just here because of luck. Because of course, there was the conversation that Moi was not fit to be president. He only became president because he was the vice president. But then one thing people fail to remember, Moi had been in leadership for 23 years. And for part of these 23 years, he had been the vice president. And that meant he had all the time to prepare for this role. He had seen Kenyatta's playbook. He had seen how Kenyatta handled his cabinet and how Kenyatta made his decisions. And from there, he had picked lessons on what he wanted to do, what he did not want to do, or how he wanted his presidency to run, and how he wanted it to look like. So in as much as there was that conversation of him not being a fit leader, he had been in the leadership for quite some time, so he knew what he was doing. And I think for the next season, around 4 episodes we have prepared, we'll be exploring Moi's leadership and his presidency spanning over 2 decades, and just looking at his style of leadership, and not only his style of leadership, but how he became the Moi that, people loved, people hated, the Moi that people would line on the roads to sing praises for, and the Moi that people absolutely feared. And I think one of the turning points was he had dealt with being underestimated for so long to the time when now we were having the attempted coup by Hezekiah Ochuka. He felt like, okay, these guys are now overdoing it. You people are too much. I have been underestimated before. I won't let it happen again. And for most people who understand his leadership, many would say that that was his turning point. So of course, the point of him being the president and the conversations that were happening by the Gema community and the barons in the cabinet, feeling he was unfit, that made him want to be a good president. And he tried, honestly, within the first term, he tried and he did his level best. And he was not so bad politically. He was a good president at that time. We had Maziwa Nyayo, we had some economic transformation at least, and there was very little stealing, especially those that happened during Kenyatta's tenure. And the whole issue of him amassing land for himself like Kenyatta did, of course he amassed land for himself, but that reduced significantly. Essentially he dished land to his people, his kitchen cabinet, his cronies, and those who supported him. And that's how most of the people around him became very rich. He rewarded loyalty, so to speak. He rewarded loyalty. Then we moved to the Moi where we had the YK92, which we also talked about. So you can go back and rewatch that. And after the coup, it is said that that is what fundamentally changed Moi's perception on Kenya and those that surrounded him, because that coup essentially served to show that we can overthrow you. So he came back from the position that you can't overthrow me. I have to assert my dominance. I have to prove to you that I'm the man here. I have to show you guys that I am the one heading this country and you can't just do as you wish. And he became strict. there was more killing, more corruption around that time after the coup. So it changed his way of thinking, it changed his style of leadership, and it moved away from the Nyayo philosophy that he preached, and we had the Nyayo torture chambers. So anyway, when I tell you guys there's a lot to talk about this man, there's a lot. But today I just wanted us to focus on his appointment as for him to become the president, and essentially the doubts that surrounded him as a leader and him as a president, and how he became the president that we know from someone very unknown, someone very fickle, someone no one would think of. People would just dismiss him because, well, this is just another herdsman boy, you know, just a teacher. There was nothing more to him. But he moved from that to a very powerful position and took all the lessons from the insults that he used to receive and took that to position him to the president that was loved, respected, hated, and feared across the globe. So for now, just stay tuned for our new season that will be coming up in a month or so. And we will highlight bits of his presidency, and I think we will delve more into his presidency because there was so much to unpack which I could not do in one episode, and this will just serve as an introductory episode. Thank you guys for watching. Feel free to share the episodes, feel free to subscribe and like. I think from the analytics I've seen, most of our viewers are those who've not subscribed. Guys, mananiangusha by the way, nasipoa. So please subscribe. Share with your friends, call everyone to come watch. There's so much to talk about. There's so much we've talked about so far. This is like our 9th or 10th episode, right? 9th episode. Yeah, so just go watch all the other episodes. Leave your comments because we want to pick the lessons we've taken from this first season and see what to do better when it comes to the coming seasons. So thank you guys so much. Bye.
My Lord, may God forgive him for saying such.
I could not be without having a woman because that could give me prostate cancer.
And I can only imagine the sense of betrayal, anger, and uncertainty.
Najenga dam ya Aror na Kimwarer kule katika sehemu ya Elgeyo Marakwet.
I went to Alliance Gas School. That was the school that people who would make it went to.
Africa, a land rich in natural resources, wildlife, and diverse culture. Historically seen as a dark continent, I think it's time we shed some light on the stories of people and events that have shaped our beautiful continent. Join me through this journey as we retrace our African footprints.